may remember that some time ago, it's probably been about 3 years ago now, that I studied with you the Exodus. Not a study of the book of Exodus, but the event of Exodus. And it was during that time that we were looking at this journey of God's people from slavery to redemption. And we were trying to delve into the details of that, yet find the meaning for us in our own lives. And we recognized at that point that there was a larger message than the events of an ancient people who were living in an ancient civilization. It was God telling us a story with a purpose. It was meaningful because we all have an Exodus story. We all have a story all of us who have come to God, a story of us and our redemption. Our story of how we transition from the bondage of slavery into this position of God's family and being redeemed. And so we were able to internalize that and personalize the story of the Exodus in a very real way. And I hope that that was helpful to you, that we come to understand our own freedom from the bonds of captivity and into our freedom in Christ, and how we enter into a covenant with God, and how we become part of God's family, and how we find our identity. All of those events are reflected so beautifully in the story of the Exodus. And so it is with, we just have to pause for a moment and think about, what is God doing? What's He doing here? Telling stories. He's telling me about these events of people long ago, and what does that mean for me? And part of what that means to me is that we need to be in awe of God and His creativity and the means in which He communicates with us. He doesn't just give us a narrative, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and here's what your role is in all of this. No, He tells us these elaborate stories and gives us this elaborate detail. And we begin to appreciate how God tells these stories. And it reveals these multiple layers of complexity and multiple layers of beauty and multiple layers of the creativity of the Creator. And I want us to grasp that concept again, because we're going to find those very same elements to be true of our study of Hebrews. I want us to be impressed with how God has so creatively laid out the history of the world leading up to the most important point of history, which is the cross. And that's what Hebrews does. So wonderfully and so amazingly. And so as we delve into the details of the big picture of Hebrews, and we are able to mingle in with that an adequate understanding of these Old Testament concepts that are revealed in Hebrews, then we will be astonished, I believe. We will be astonished at the creativity of God as a storyteller, as a communicator of His will and His purposes. We will be astonished at His creativity as a redemptive planner. It will be amazing as we consider Him as the grand architect and conductor of the redemption story. And it all begins with this, well, it doesn't really begin with Israel, but it really comes to life as God brings this nation of Israel through the promises of Abraham to become His people, who are given His law, who are given this covenant. Now, we need to go back in time a bit, in our imaginations and in our mind, and think about what did the book of Hebrews mean to the first century Jewish mind who was receiving this. These Jews who were struggling with their own identity. Am I a Jew? Am I a Christian? What does this all mean? How does this continue in my life? But as you back up and look at this big picture, you can almost hear God say, before the foundation of the world, I'm going to create these people, and they're going to bear my image. How is it that I'm going to reveal who I am to them? How is it that I'm going to introduce myself to my creation? And furthermore, how is it that I'm going to share with them my plan to welcome them into my fellowship? How am I going to reveal to them that I have a plan for your redemption? Well, this is what I'm going to do, God says. Before the foundations of the world, I'm going to build a nation. And I'm going to give them a law. And I'm going to teach them what it means to be holy. And I'm going to teach them what it means to be pure. And I'm going to teach them what it means to understand redemption and blood sacrifice. I'm going to teach them all of this, and I'm going to use this nation of Israel to accomplish this purpose of teaching not only them, but ultimately the entire world, His entire creation, what His plans are. And so as we open up the book of Hebrews, these things begin to come to life. These things begin to become part of our own imagination as we think about these things. And then he says, not only am I going to teach them who I am, not only am I going to reveal my plan for them, not only am I going to be their king and their leader, I'm going to teach them how they may approach me, how they may draw near to me, and what the obstacles may be about that. It's getting exciting now. It's getting exciting. God is teaching us. This is for you and for me. He's teaching us how we have this ability to draw near to Him, to enter into His fellowship. And during that time of before the foundations of the world, we can almost observe the angels huddled together, pondering, what is He doing? Peter talked about that. Angels long to look into these mysteries and to understand them. And you've been blessed that He's revealing these mysteries to you. And Paul in the book of Ephesians tells us about how he's establishing the church to bring these facts to the principalities and the powers, even the demonic angels. As they're wondering what God is accomplishing, they can ponder those things. And they're watching. What is God doing? What's He accomplishing? What's this nation of Israel all about? What is this leading to? And it's leading to Jesus. You look at our title slide together. The name of the class is Shadows in Hebrews. And what this slide does, it visually proposes the point of this class. That we have the cross in the forefront. We have the cross demonstrated in its glory for us, but before the cross, leading up to the cross, is this shadow. And that shadow represents all of those things that we've just introduced very briefly. The nation of Israel. The concept of a a priesthood, the concept of a tabernacle, the concept of the high priest and entering into the veil, into the Holy of Holies. All of those events and stories that were told back then were these shadows that were pointing to the accomplishments of the cross. And the Hebrew writer refers to them as shadows and copies and symbols and things of this nature. But all of these things are leading up to the cross. The shadows represent the truth about what the cross is. And it gives us a little bit of insight into that. And it begins to reveal the insight into what the substance of the cross is. The shadow itself contains no substance. What's a shadow? A shadow, by definition, is just the absence of light, right? If you were to consider only the shadow, what do you have there? And you might put yourself, again, in the mindset of the first century Jew. This is all they have. They have this shadow. All of these things are leading up to something. They don't probably gather the concept that these are just shadows, because this is everything to them. The priesthood is everything. The Holy of Holies is everything to them. Now, we need to understand the limitation of shadows. Shadows give some impression of the actual thing, right? We can look at that and say, oh, okay, I can kind of see that. I can kind of see that's kind of reflecting what the cross is. And we can derive some information from that. But if you really want to know about that shadow, can you go and pick it up and examine it? No, you can't do that, can you? Because it's immaterial. You can't handle it. You can't pick it up. It's a two-dimensional, imperfect representation. It only speaks of what the substance is, and it does so imperfectly. The substance, as it stands in the light, gives you a shadow. You can learn some things about the shadow, but the shadow is not a cross. The shadow doesn't accomplish the cross. And this is the word that the writer of Hebrews uses to describe those events of Judaism. Paul also used that word in Colossians as well to talk about shadow versus the substance. So it's not perfect in proportion, and it's not clear in every way, but this is what is true of the shadows of Hebrews. They provide insight and depth into our understanding of what the cross is and about what they reflect. And you know what it is? The amazing thing is that tabernacle, it's all about Jesus. Can you imagine? That priesthood, it's all about Jesus. The high priest, once a year going into the Holy of Holies, it's all about Jesus. All of these shadows pointing forward to this substantial moment in time. And so we find these remarkable truths being revealed in this remarkable way. Now, I do have some objectives for this class, and I just wanted to go through these with you briefly. We want to always have purpose for what we're trying to accomplish. And so here are some of the purposes that I hope that we accomplish in our study together. I want us to deepen our appreciation of how God is so creative, how He can tell stories. He has literary creativity. Now, we as human beings, we have an appreciation for foreshadowings in stories and in movies that we watch, right? Those things tickle our imagination, and we what comes to my mind immediately is the movie The Sixth Sense. That movie is full of foreshadowings. And when that little boy says, "I see dead people," that should have been a hint to us, right? Well, he's standing there talking with Bruce Willis, right? And we didn't find out till later Bruce Willis was dead. But we had these foreshadowings that, probably the biggest foreshadowing was the chest gunshot, in the opening scenes of the movie. That gave us a foreshadowing. Bruce Willis, his character, was dead throughout the entire movie. But we didn't know that till later, right? So those types of foreshadowings, we have an appreciation for that, right? That tickles our imagination. Do you think God doesn't know that? God knows that. And he does some of the very same things. All of these events of the Old Testament, as they unfold in their beauty and in their glory, they are pointing us to something even more spectacular. They are foreshadowings. And God is creative in his literary ability to communicate with his creation. He's a creative storyteller. He's creative in architecture and design of the plan and schemes that he is unfolding for us. It's a beautiful thing. I also want us to deepen our appreciation of the gospel plan because it becomes so very clear in our study of Hebrews. The facts about redemption. We need to understand what that means and gather some depth to that understanding. Hebrews allows us to delve into that somewhat. I want us to have an understanding of how colorful and imaginative those representations of promises and truth are. Understand what God is doing. And then I also want us to deepen our appreciation for what that meant for those first century Jews and try to step into their shoes a little bit and come to understand what they thought about these things. I want us to also deepen our recognition of God's favor upon us. God has revealed these mysteries to us in these complete ways, and as we already mentioned, the angels long to look into these mysteries and to understand these. Our generation is blessed to have the mysteries unfold before us, to have the whole story presented to us, to be able to see the whole story in its glory, which includes the shadows leading up to the substance. I want us to see the plan of God unfold in God's marvelous light and develop a deeper appreciation for what that means. This class, I hope, will be a faith-building class, that it will reassure us that God is the keeper of promises. That's who he is. That is his character. And that his plans, when he makes them, they always come to fruition. There's no one that can thwart his plans. The children of Israel were not a perfect people, and it seems that the plan of God would be derailed time and time again. But God was able to bring these truths to fruition and bring us all the way to the cross. He accomplished these purposes dramatically and in living color. And as we think about the layers of relativity and the layers of meaning to these things, we should be impressed. I want us to be inspired, to be in awe of God for what he has done, because that's what Hebrews should accomplish to us in this generation. To be impressed with all of these things leading up to and becoming the story of Jesus, the story of redemption, and what that means to us. Jesus, you see, is the substance to all of the shadows. I sent out an email earlier this week and asked you to think about a few things. So I hope that you've been thinking about those things and you can share those things with the class today. And the first question I asked was, what was that tabernacle all about? What was God hoping to accomplish in giving the people the instructions about building a tabernacle? What do you think about that? Vaughn? It was a place for him to dwell with the people. Okay, very good. Yeah, Vaughn.
It was recreating the garden, essentially. As you look, when you would walk in there and you would see all these pomegranates and everything else that was decorating the temple, it was like a recreation of the garden, where man and God could come face to face with one another.
So the details. Don't overlook the details is what Vaughn is telling us. God was accomplishing something beautiful in recreating even a paradise for God and man to be together. Very good. Yeah, Bonnie.
I think it was a place that outlined his separation and his holiness from them.
Yeah. So the people would be able to process in their minds that there is a difference between us and God. And that God is separate. He is holy. And there are obstacles to reaching God, right? And these obstacles must be overcome somehow. And he gives lots of instructions about how these washings need to take place and all of the preparations that the priests must go through in order to be able to come to him and worship. Yes,
Only just the fact that it was treated with such reverence and such awe that even the way they carried it, how they carried it, who carried it, when they carried it, how it was carried, it was specific stipulation to them of the supremacy of God, yet God with them.
Again, attention to the details. God was very specific, and they were careful to carry out, and Moses was careful to record all of those details and to build it according to the pattern, and those details were extensive. And so that reinforced in the minds of the people of that generation, God is specific about what he wants. Don't make assumptions about that.
God gifted men just to
Okay.
He gave men the hand that gave the artisans that gifted the men to build.
Yeah.
So important.
So the use of your skills and your art should be in the presentation of the command of God. Yes, he did. He did that. You know, the second question that I asked you. Oh, Ray, yes.
I was going to build on your theme on shadows. They had just come out of the nation of Egypt. They were reintroduced to God. God knew that this wasn't going to be their permanent location. So it's that first step in establishing a new relationship with this place of honor, of separation, with all these other things that have been said, so they get to the promised land where there'll be a more permanent structure that God's going to exist in there for 400 years.
Yep.
Bruce, in a more broader sense, with all the details and regulations, I suggest that this is what God called worship and service for his people.
Yeah. He detailed to them his expectations of worship and service. You're right. Very good. And that leads us into the second question, which I planted there as a hint to the first question. And so let me just kind of develop that just a little bit. The second question is actually a foreshadowing of the first question in that way. This concept of drawing near, this idea of drawing near, was accomplished through the tabernacle. Their ideas of what it means to draw near, to approach God, is accomplished in the tabernacle. He's building this place for them to think about that. To think about how it is that I am going to come near to God and establish this relationship with God and to accept Him and His covenant as my King and enter into God's family. With all of the manifestations of His greatness up there on Mount Sinai, that was rather intimidating to think about approaching God, wasn't it? They were terrified. Moses, you go up there and you handle that. We cannot stand the awesome demonstrations of God's power and glory. Please, make it stop. And yet He says, you're going to build this tabernacle. And here is how you draw near to me. And so my second question was, go through the book of Hebrews and identify some texts of Scripture that describe this idea of drawing near. Because that is a repetitive theme, and that tells us that that's one of the primary themes of Hebrews. This is how you draw near to me. And the tabernacle is used as a template to describe that. Before we look at those verses, though, there are some Old Testament verses that really give us some insight, and I'm not going to have time probably to look at those very, very much, but just very quickly. In Leviticus, the 9th chapter, and verse 7, God's giving instruction to Moses and Aaron about how the priests are going to draw near and offer their tabernacle worship and the sacrifices. And he says then to Moses, then Moses said to Aaron, draw near to the altar, and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people, and bring the offering of the people and make atonement for them as the Lord has commanded. So part of what it means to draw near to God is to understand this concept of atonement. There must be atonement. There must be a recognition of the sins of the people that have to be set aside somehow. And this was the means by which he was doing that. So when you draw near, that's tied very closely to that idea of atonement. If you go over a few chapters in Leviticus 21, there's a long list given to the priests about who may serve and who may not serve. And specifically, he says, for no one who has a blemish shall draw near. Again, that idea of drawing near. No one who has a blemish among the priests were allowed to draw near and offer that kind of worship. A blind man or lame or has a mutilated face or a limb too long, or a man has an injured foot or an injured hand or a hunchback, and he goes on and on talking about all of the defects, the physical defects that appear in men. He said, that's not suitable because that's not perfect. Now, that's not insulting to those people. This is God saying, when you draw near to me, you must be perfect. And even those who did not have defects bodily, there were ceremonial washings that they did to cleanse. There were sacrifices that they made on their own behalf to set aside their sins or to atone for their sins. So no defect can draw near in a priestly role as a worshiper of God. And even over in Ezekiel 43, he says in verse 19, you shall give to the Levitical priests of the family of Zadok who draw near to me to minister to me, declares the Lord God, a bull from the herd for a sin offering. And you shall take some of its blood and put it on the four horns of the altar, on the four corners of the ledge, upon the rim all around. Thus you shall purify the altar and make atonement for it. Again, this drawing near to God closely related to that idea of atonement for sin. So when we come over to the book of Hebrews and we see this idea of drawing near, what did you find? Let's go sequentially through Hebrews. What is the first draw near passage that you find in this essay of Hebrews?
Number 6.
Chapter 4 and verse, is it 6 or 16? Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Our drawing near involves receiving grace and mercy and help, because we have those spiritual defects, right? We have sin. And so we have to have this boldness to draw near, understanding that redemption has been accomplished through the cross. And now that obstacle is removed. And now we can draw near. What else did you find in Hebrews 7? We have to hurry. I'm almost out of time. 7:19. For the law made nothing perfect, but on the other hand, a better hope is introduced. A better hope through which we draw near to God. So this drawing near to God is closely connected to hope that is offered because of Jesus' sacrifice. Now we may draw near. Also in chapter 7, consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. The way of salvation, then, we discover, is by drawing near, because Jesus is our intercessor. What's the next draw near passage in Hebrews? I'm sorry? 10, chapter 10, verse 1. For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. Again, drawing near is connected to perfection. We must be perfect if we are to draw near. The old shadows did not accomplish that. That is accomplished only in Jesus, right? Is the point that the Hebrew writer is making. Jesus is that perfect sacrifice who renders us perfect as well. And I found one more. I don't know if you found 6, but I found 6. Day drawing near. Actually, that was number 5. Let us draw near with a full heart, full of assurance of faith. And then in Hebrews 11, without faith it's impossible to please him. Whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he is indeed. And he rewards those who seek him. All right. Well, so much more to say. So for next week, I want you to, if you haven't done so, read the entire essay of Hebrews, with a special focus on chapters 8, 9, and 10. We'll look more closely at those chapters. Maybe I'll send out an email with some more thought questions. Thank you for your participation.